So, I'm finally back. Hey guys. So, the one thing that I want to really apologize for is that I've been gone for so fucking long and I did not realize that it's been like a month. And I'm like, oh my god. But I have a completely new story. And I'm working on doing all the requests right now, and I know I've been like really bad with this. But I'm binging doing at least 2 or 3 a day, and all of them should be pretty long. Like this one is 32 pages. 32 pages, and it's a Draco Malfoy listener one. Again, and listener this time is Mel. It's only referenced 3 times, I think, so if you want to listen to this in your quote, feel free to. Okay, and the playlist that we're listening to in the background is called POV or In the Mood, or Playlist for Unholy Things, only because I was listening to it while writing it, and it's actually so good. And I'll link in the bio, as always. But, hey! But yeah, let's get right into it. Just a warning, there's, like, hella tension. And there's dialogue, but there's not a lot of it. It's mostly storytelling. But, let's go! The worn leather cover of the diary felt smooth beneath your fingers. The edges frayed from years of use. It was well loved, or, at the very least, well used. The spine creaked softly as her thumb brushed over it. The scent of ink and parchment mingling with something dark, distinctly Malfoy. Expensive cologne, the faintest trace of peppermint. You hadn't meant to find it. Not really. It had been tucked under Draco Malfoy's pillow in the Slytherin dormitory, just barely peeking out when you'd gone to return the quill he left behind in potions. You could have ignored it. Should have ignored it. But something about the sight of it, something about the idea of Draco Malfoy keeping a diary made your fingers curl on the cover before you could even think of it. You and Draco had a complicated, whatever it was, a rivalry, maybe, a game. You weren't sure what to call it. Since first year, it had been a constant battle of sharp words and sharper glances, always teetering on the edge of something neither of you dared to name. He was Malfoy, arrogant, cold, perfectly put together, and infuriatingly untouchable. And you were you, his equal in wit, just as sharp-tongued, refusing to back down no matter how often he looked at you like you were nothing but a nuisance and annoyance. And yet, here you were. You hesitated for only a moment before flipping the cover open, your breath catching as you took in the first few lines. The ink was dark, bold against the yellow pages, the handwriting looser than the perfect scrawl he used on his assignments, smudged in places where he must have pressed too hard, as if in this space he allowed himself to be something other than perfect. Your gaze skimmed the first lines, curiosity prickling at your skin. I hate how he gets under my skin. I hate how he looks at me, like I'm just another one of those arrogant little brats. Like I'm nothing more than the name I was given. You froze, your pulse thrummed against your ribs, a steady beat of disbelief. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You read the sentence again, slower this time, as if the words might shift and change under your gaze, as if they might stop implying what you thought they did. He wasn't talking about you, was he? You swallowed, gnawing at the edges of your mind. You shouldn't be reading this. You should close the book and put it back where you found it. Pretend you'd never seen it at all. But your fingers didn't move. Your breath came a little too fast, a little too shallow. As you let your eyes trail down the page, every entry was rawer than the last. Pieces of Malfoy that you'd never seen before. The expectations weighing on him, the pressure from his father, the nights he'd spent staring at the ceiling, feeling like he didn't fit anywhere. And you were there, scattered throughout the pages, always lingering between lines of frustration and something else, something hesitant, uncertain. He makes me furious, always pushing, always acting like I don't bother him at all. I don't know if I want to hex him or... The ink trailed off, as if he hadn't been able to bring himself to finish the sentence. Your stomach twisted. The weight of the diary in your hands felt heavier now, as if the words within had shifted something inside you, knocked loose something you hadn't realized was there. For a long moment, you simply stood there, staring at the unfinished sentence, Then, carefully, you shut the book, smoothing your palm over the leather cover before sliding it back under his pillow exactly where he'd found it. But the words followed you. They lingered in your mind throughout the common room, through class, through dinner. Through every glance in Draco's direction that you suddenly couldn't stop yourself from making. You weren't sure what you were looking for. Confirmation, denial. But he looked the same as always, sharp-edged and unreadable, as if his mind weren't filled with thoughts of you. You told yourself you wouldn't look again. But the second time, you found yourself standing by his bed when you were sure he was in the library. Your fingers hesitating just for a second before pulling the diary free once more. And this time, the ink was still wet. I think about him too much. I dreamt about him last night. I don't know what's worse, that I liked it, or that I woke up and wishing it was real. Your breath hitched. Somewhere deep in your chest, something unraveled. You told yourself it was the last time, but it never was. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and the diary became something you couldn't stay away from. You weren't sure what pulled you back each time. The need to understand him, the strange compulsion to see if you were still mentioned, or the fact that Draco Malfoy, the boy who never let a single emotion slip past his carefully guarded exterior, was practically pouring his soul into ink and parchment. He had no idea you were reading every word. You started memorizing his habits, the times he was most likely to be in the library, how long his Quidditch practices were, when he would stay late talking to Pansy and Blaze in the common room. You always timed it perfectly, slipping into the dormitory unnoticed, your heart pounding as you reached under his pillow and pulled out the diary. Flipping to the latest entry with fingers that trembled more than you liked to admit. Sometimes it was frustration. Pages filled with sharp, angry words and complaints about his father, about his responsibilities, about the expectations that were slowly suffocating him, but more often than not, it was about you. He drives me mad. One moment, I can't stand the sight of him, and the next, I can't stop myself from looking for him in a crowd. I don't know when this started. I don't know why it won't stop. Your stomach always twisted when you found yourself on the pages. Sometimes the words were laced with resentment, other times uncertainty, but more and more, they were edged with something dangerously close to longing. Today, in class, he smirked at me after answering a question I got wrong. I should have been furious. I was furious. But then he leaned back in his chair, looking so damn pleased with himself. And all I could think about was how much I wanted to wipe that smirk off his face with my own mouth. That was the night you couldn't sleep. It was getting harder to pretend nothing had changed. You caught yourself watching him too often, waiting for a glance, for the faintest shift in his mask. Sorry, I was reading really slow. Waiting for a glance, for the faintest shift in his mask. You noticed things you hadn't before. The way he tapped his quill against the edge of his desk when he was deep in thought. The way his fingers curled when he was suppressing a reaction. The way his gaze always lingered on you. For a second too long when he thought you weren't looking. You were playing with fire. Eventually, he got burned. It was late. The dormitory empty. The only sound the crackling of the fireplace in the common room below. You had timed it perfectly again. Draco had left with his bag slung over his shoulder, muttering something about finishing an assignment in the library. You waited, heart hammering, before making your way to his bed, fingers already reaching under his pillow. The leather was warm from where his hand had rested, and a strange sort of guilt gnawed at your insides as you pulled the diary free and flipped it open. The last entry stared back at you. I think I know now. Why I dream about him. Why I can't stop thinking about him. I was never supposed to feel this way. I fought it. I still want to fight it. But it's getting harder, and I think... The words cut off. Your brow furrowed, the ink was wet, and then... What the fuck? I'm sorry. Oh my god. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Ice flooded your veins. The diary slipped from your fingers, landing with a soft thud against the mattress, but you couldn't move. Every muscle in your body locked in place as you slowly turned your head. Draco stood in the doorway, his silver eyes dark and stormy, his expression caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. Your mouth went dry. For the first time in your life, you had nothing to say. You ran. For the first time in your life, you ran. You didn't think, you didn't hesitate. The second you saw the look in Draco's eyes, pure fury, betrayal, and something else too raw to name, your body moved before your mind could catch up. Your legs carried you out of the dormitory, through the common room, past the startled faces of other Slytherins who barely had time to register the blur of you sprinting past. "Oi, where's the fire?" Someone called, but you barely heard them over the pounding of your heartbeat. Oi! Sorry. The judging corridors were cold, stone beneath your feet, unforgiving as you ran faster, chest light, lungs burning. Not chest light. Chest tight, lungs burning. Your thoughts came in a jumbled mess, tangled between panic and realization. He knows. Stupid. You'd been so stupid. You should have stopped months ago. You should have put the diary back and never looked at it again. You should have never let yourself get caught. But you had. And now, you had no idea what was coming next. Your feet barely made a sound as you tore through the corridors, up the stairs, past stunned students who turned their heads to watch you go. Somewhere behind you, footsteps echoes. His footsteps. He was following you, hunting you down. Your mind scattered as you kept running, but something in your chest twisted violently at the thought of facing him again. At the thought of what he might say. At the thought of what you had read, what he had written. Because now, it wasn't just about you getting caught. It wasn't about the invasion of privacy. It was about the words you had spent months reading, the confessions hidden in ink, the things he had felt. I think I know now. The sentence haunted you. The unfinished thought, the truth he had been too afraid to put into words. You pushed harder, your legs burning, your breath ragged. The halls blurred around you, the castle stretching on endlessly as you ran. Because stopping meant facing him, and you couldn't face him. Not like this. The sound of footsteps behind you sent another jolt of panic through your veins. He was following you. Of course he was. Draco Malfoy never let anything go. Think. You turned a corner so sharply you nearly lost your footing. Your shoulders slamming against the cold stone wall. Your heartbeat roared in your ears, your chest tight. You needed to disappear. Then you saw it. A door. It hadn't been there before. You knew it hadn't. But suddenly, it was as if the castle itself had decided to give you an escape route. And you knew what this was. The room of requirement. Without a second thought, you grabbed the handle and wrenched it open. Darting inside, just as the footsteps rounded the corridor behind you, you barely had time to register the space before the doors slammed shut behind you, sealing you in, sealing him out. Silence. Your entire body shook, every nerve still on fire. You stumbled back, chest heaving, your back hitting a bookshelf because apparently the room had given you a library. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled with books of every shape and size, dim candlelight flickering in sconces along the stone walls. It was warm, safe, silent, a sanctuary. You exhaled sharply, hands trembling as you pressed your palms to your face, dragging them down slowly. Draco was out there. He had been seconds away from catching you, from demanding answers you weren't ready to give. You turned, pressing your forehead against the cold wall of the bookshelf. Your mind spun. He knew. And now there was no taking it back. You stayed there for hours. Time stretched endlessly as you sat on the floor, knees drawn up, staring blankly at the flickering candlelight. The weight of what had happened pressed down on you, suffocating. Inescapable. Every time you closed your eyes, you saw the diary, the ink, his words. You saw Draco's face when he caught you before you ran, that flicker of fury, disbelief, something deeper, something wounded. You buried your face in your hands, exhaling shakily. What the hell had you been thinking? You should have stopped the first time. You should have never let your curiosity win. But you had, again and again, until now, when everything had collapsed in a single moment and you had bolted like a coward. You weren't sure how long you sat there, wrestling with yourself. The room of requirement had given you exactly what you needed. Solitude, space, silence. But it wouldn't keep you hidden forever. At some point, you had to leave. You couldn't stay there locked away, pretending this hadn't happened. Could you? The thought was tempting, but you had to go back, eventually. And so, long past midnight, you slipped out. The corridor was empty, the castle cloaked in silence, shadows stretching long against the walls. You moved carefully, footsteps barely making a sound as you crept through the halls, your entire body on edge. Every flickering torch made you flinch. Every distant creak of the castle made your heart pound. You couldn't be seen. Not like this. Not by him. The closer you got to the Slytherin dorms, the worse the anxiety coiled in your gut. You stuck to the shadows. Moving like a ghost, your breath shallow as you neared the entrance. You paused at the last turn. Waited. Listened. Silence. A minute passed. Then two. Then, slowly, carefully, you moved again, slipping inside the common room. Empty. You exhaled. Relief washing over you. No one was waiting. No silver eyes in the dark, no accusing words. Still, your hands trembled as you finally made it to your dormitory. Easing the door open just enough to step inside, the room was quiet, the only sounds the soft breathing of your sleeping dorm mates. And in the dim light, you saw it. Draco's bed, the curtains drawn tight, your stomach twisted. You didn't know if he was awake, if he was lying there, waiting, if he had given up, if he even cared. You swallowed hard, forcing yourself to move, slipping beneath your own covers with stiff limbs. You barely breathed as you stared at the ceiling, your heart still stammering from the chase, from the hours of running, from the world you can never unleave. You had made it back, but for the first time, you wondered if you had really escaped at all. The days that followed were hell. You avoided Draco like your life depended on it. Every time you walked into a room, your eyes darted around instinctively, searching for him before your brain could even process the action. Every time you heard his voice, even from across the great hall, even in a crowd, you turned the other way. If he entered the common room, you left. If you saw the platinum blonde head of hair in the corridors, you ducked out of sight. If there was even the possibility of running into him, you changed your path without a second thought. It was pathetic. What did I say like that? It was pathetic. But the thought of facing him, of seeing the look in his eyes, of hearing whatever words he had saved for you, made your stomach twist violently. The guilt was bad. The shame was worse. But worst of all was the fear. Not the fear of confrontation, not the fear of what he might do. No, it was the fear of knowing. Of hearing him say the things you already knew were true. That you had betrayed him. That you had invaded his privacy in the worst way. That he hated you for it. So you kept running. But running came at a cost. You stopped sleeping first. At night, you lay awake in bed, staring at the canopy above you, exhaustion dragging at your limbs but never quite pulling you under. Your mind wouldn't stop, circling, replaying, agonizing over every single moment of the past few months, the stolen words, the lingering glances. The moment you opened the diary for the first time, the way your heart had raced when you saw your name, the way you had craved seeing it again, the way you hadn't been able to stop, the way you had run. Your body felt weighed down with exhaustion, but sleep never came, and when it did, it was restless, plagued by nightmares of silver eyes catching you in the dark. Then you stopped eating. You picked at your food, appetite non-existent, nausea curling in your stomach at the mere thought of forcing something down. The heavy weight in your gut never left, twisting tighter and tighter every time you saw him. Across the great hall, in the common room, in class. Even though you never met his eyes, you felt his presence like an open wound, raw and unhealed. You stopped talking next. At first, it was just less than normal. Short answers, forced laughs, a few nods here and there when your friends tried to include you, then it became nothing at all. They noticed. Of course they did. Pansy shot you wary glances. Theo nudged you more than once. Even Blaze commented on how quiet you'd gotten. But you brushed them off, murmured some excuse, something about being tired, about having too much homework, about anything other than the truth. And the truth was, you were drowning. You felt sick, but worse than that, you felt watched. Even when you couldn't see him, you felt him. There were moments, too many moments, where you swore his gaze was on you. A prickle down your spine in a common room, a flicker of movement from the corner of your eye in the corridors, a weight in the classroom, heavy and unmoving, making the air feel thick and suffocating. You never checked. You didn't dare. Because you knew. Draco was waiting for you to slip, for you to face him. The paranoia was unbearable. You were a shadow of yourself, moving through the castle like a ghost. Flinching at every shift of movement around you, you stuck to the edges of rooms, stayed silent in conversations, barely breathed when you felt that weight settle on you again. His weight. You didn't have to look to know his eyes were on you. But he didn't approach, didn't chase you down, didn't speak. He was waiting, and the waiting was killing you. Sorry, I have to catch my breath. I'm singing like poem. I don't know why, but I don't know. The breaking point came late one evening. The common room was quiet, most students already having gone to bed. You were curled up in one of the armchairs by the fireplace, staring blankly at the flickering flames, exhaustion pressing against your skull like a vice. You hadn't meant to stay this long, but the thought of trying to sleep was unbearable. Footsteps. Your body tensed immediately. They weren't loud, but they weren't hesitant either, measured, purposeful, and getting closer. The air changed, thickened. The fine hairs on the back of your neck stood on end. Your stomach twisted violently, nausea rolling through you in waves. You didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare look up. Presence settled beside you. A slow, deliberate exhale, then you've been avoiding me. Your entire body went rigid. His voice was calm, too calm, low and quiet, but not soft. There was steel beneath it. Something sharp and cutting, something that made your heart pound against your ribs. You swallowed hard, forcing your breathing to remain even. I don't know what you're talking about, you said, voice barely above a whisper. Silence, then the sound of movement. The chair next to yours creaked as he shifted, as he leaned closer. Look at me. You couldn't. You wouldn't. You kept your eyes locked on the fire, forcing your hands to stay in your lap, even as your fingers curled into the fabric of your robes. His breath was slow, measured. Look at me. A demand, this time. You clenched your jaw, then warmth. Fingers cold against your skin, pressing beneath your chin. Your heart stopped. Slowly, he tilted your face toward him, his touch feather-light but unyielding. Your pulse roared in your ears as you fought against every instant, screaming at you to run. And then, silver eyes, fixed on yours, unblinking, unrelenting, trapping you in place. Draco's face was unreadable, but his grip on your chin, gentle yet firm, told you enough. There was no running this time. You read my diary, he said. Voice quiet but heavy with something you couldn't place. The words sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through you. Shame clawed at your insides, leaving you raw, exposed. You opened your mouth, whether to deny it or explain. You weren't sure, but the look in his eyes made your throat close. He knew. Of course he knew. But now there was no escaping what came next. The silence between you stretched, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the quiet crackling of the fire, but even that felt distant. Drowned beneath the pounding of your own heartbeat. Draco's fingers remained beneath your chin, a barely there touch, but the weight of it was unbearable. Your skin burned where he touched you, as if his fingers carried the fury, the betrayal, the hurt that simmered beneath his calm exterior. He was waiting for you to admit it, waiting for you to break. You swallowed hard, your throat dry. Your voice faltered. Too weak, too thin. Draco's gaze didn't waver. His grip didn't tighten, didn't force you to speak. But there was something in his eyes, something sharp and cutting, something that told you there was no talking your way out of this. So you did the only thing you could. You nodded. A single slow dip of your head. His fingers twitched, just barely, then he exhaled through his nose, a breath that was neither relief nor anger, something in between. For the first time, his eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with confirmation. He had known, but hearing it, seeing it, was different. His hand dropped from your chin, and you immediately missed the warmth. He sat back in the chair, posture still tense, but his expression shifted. The mask cracked, just slightly, and you saw it then, beneath the anger, beneath the unreadable exterior, hurt. He looked away. Oh, God. Running a hand through his hair, fingers digging into his scalp for a fleeting moment before dropping to his lap. How long? Your stomach clenched. You knew what he was asking. Not how long had you been avoiding him, not how long had you been running, but how long had you been reading. You lowered your gaze, unable to hold his any longer. Shame burned through you, hot and suffocating. A while, you admitted, barely above a whisper. Draco let out a slow, sharp breath, tilting his head back against the chair. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightened into fists before slowly relaxing. Of course you have. He muttered, more to himself than to you. Another silence stretched between you, thick with things neither of you knew how to say. Then, why? You flinched. The question struck deeper than it should have. Why? Why had you done it? You could have told him it was curiosity, but the sight of his handwriting, unguarded, raw, had pulled you in before you could stop yourself, that you had never intended to keep reading, but you had, over and over until you needed to. You could have told him 1,000 times, but none of them, 1,000 things, but none of them would have been the truth. The truth was worse. The truth was that you had wanted to see those words, wanted to know him in a way no one else did, wanted to be the person who understood. But could you say that? How could you tell him that every entry had felt like a secret message for you, even though they weren't? That every frustrated thought about you had made something in you twist in a way you didn't understand, that you had read his words and felt closer. Your throat closed around the truth. I don't know. You lied instead. Draco let out a quiet scoff, shaking his head. You do. Your breath hitched. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something unspoken. Slowly, he turned back to you. His gaze settled on yours once more. The unreadable expression was gone. What lay beneath it wasn't anger, wasn't betrayal, but something worse. You liked it, didn't you? Your entire body went rigid. Draco didn't smirk, didn't taunt. He simply watched you, waiting. Your lips parted, but no sound came, because you didn't have an answer, because he was right. You had no idea what to do about it. The fire crackled. Filling the unbearable silence between you, it was the only sound of the common room, but to you it may as well have been thunder, deafening, too loud in the quiet space Draco had carved out between you and his words. You liked it, didn't you? He repeated. He didn't move, didn't sneer, he just watched. The air in the room felt too thin, your pulse pounded in your ears so loud you were sure he could hear it. The world had narrowed to just the two of you. Draco sitting so still, hands clasped loosely in his lap, silver eyes locked onto yours with a quiet intensity that made your stomach twist violently. Your throat was dry, so impossibly dry, but you forced your lips to bark. You didn't know what was worse, lying or admitting the truth. Denying it felt pointless, a weak defense against something you both knew was real. He wasn't stupid. He wouldn't have asked if he didn't already know the answer, but saying yes, giving voice to the thing that had clawed at you for weeks, months, felt impossible. Your body screamed at you to run, to leave, to slip through the cracks before this conversation became something you couldn't come back from. But you didn't move. Neither did he. Draco tilted his head slightly, watching the way your lips pressed together, how your breathing had grown shallow. His expression was unreadable, but there was something lurking beneath the surface, something sharp, something dangerous, something that sent heat crawling up the back of your neck. Say it. Your breath caught. His voice was quiet, steady, but the command in it made you shiver. You dropped your gaze, staring at the way your fingers had curled into your robes, clutching the fabric like a lifeline. You couldn't. You couldn't. But silence was its own answer. Draco let out a slow exhale, the sound barely audible. He shifted, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. He wasn't touching you anymore, but he may as well have been, because the weight of his presence pressed against you, close enough that you could feel the heat of him. Do you know what it's been like? You blinked, startled by the softness in his voice. Your head tilted slightly, but you didn't look at him yet. Do you know what it's been like? He repeated slower this time, knowing you've been reading me this whole time. Your breath hitched, knowing you were seeing parts of me that no one else has. You opened your mouth, but no words came out. I knew, you know. That startled you. Your head snapped up. What? Draco's lips twitched. Something like a smirk, but lacking any real amusement. His gaze flickered across your face as if cataloging every reaction. I knew it wasn't where I left it sometimes, he said, voice quiet. Knew when the pages had been turned, when the ink was drier than it should have been. He huffed a small, humorous laugh. I could feel it. Someone else's eyes on my words. The nausea in your stomach twisted into something else entirely, a strange, dizzying combination of horror and disbelief. Why didn't you stop me? The words slipped out before you could think. Draco's expression flickered. For the first time, his gaze broke away, dropping slightly, like he wasn't sure how to answer, and then, maybe I wanted you to. Your chest tightened, your fingers clenched in your lap, cold and numb. Maybe I wanted you to see. A slow, searing heat curled around your spine, spreading through your limbs like wildfire. This was something different. This was no longer about betrayal, about guilt. This was something else entirely. Your breathing shallowed, your head spinning. Draco, before you could finish, he leaned in, not touching, not yet, but close enough that his breath ghosted over your skin, his voice no more than a whisper. Tell me the truth. Your lips parted, words caught between your mind and your throat. You liked it. Not a question this time. A statement. And you couldn't deny it, not when he was right there. Silver eyes watching every flicker of hesitation, every unspoken thought passing across your face. Not when your heart was slamming against your ribs, when your breath came too fast, when your entire body was burning with something you didn't want to name. You swallowed hard. And then, finally, yes. The word was barely more than a breath, but it shattered everything. Draco inhaled sharply. Something in his expression shifted. Something that made your skin prickle, made your stomach swoop dangerously. Good. And just like that, you realized something. You had spent all this time running from him. But, Draco. No. Oh, crap. Sorry. I looked away. You had spent all this time running from him, but Draco Malfoy had never once planned to let you go.